Sir, I need you to move. We have flag officers arriving in 10 minutes. The voice was crisp, polite, and utterly inflexible. It belonged to a young Navy commander whose uniform was so sharply pressed it could have cut glass. He stood on the manicured lawn of the Arlington National Cemetery Annex, a clipboard held like a shield, his gaze fixed on the back of an old man in a frayed, charcoal-colored coat. The man hadn't moved in the 45 minutes Commander Peterson had been observing him. He just stood, a solitary, stooped figure before a specific panel on the polished black granite of the Army Special Operations Memorial Wall. The wind, carrying the first real chill of late autumn, whipped at the bottom of the old man's coat and ruffled his thin gray hair, but he seemed as rooted to the spot as the stone he faced. Peterson had a schedule, a meticulously planned ceremony to honor the fallen, and this silent, unimpressive man was a disruption. He was an unplanned variable, and Commander Peterson did not like unplanned variables. "Sir, did you hear me?" Peterson said, stepping closer. He kept his voice level, the practiced tone of authority that expected and usually received immediate compliance. "This area is being secured for the memorial service. You'll have to come back this afternoon." He gestured vaguely toward the main gates. The old man didn't turn. He didn't even seem to register the commander's presence, save for a slow, almost imperceptible shake of his head. His right hand was resting against the wall, palm flat against the cold stone, a gesture of intimacy that felt out of place amidst the formal reverence of the location. Peterson noted the hand. It was weathered, the knuckles slightly swollen, the skin cross-hatched with the fine silvery lines of old scars. A working man's hand, not the hand of a dignitary or a retired officer. There were no rings, no commemorative bracelet, nothing to signify a connection. He was just an old man in a cheap coat, standing where he shouldn't be. Peterson's politeness began to fray at the edges, replaced by a thread of irritation. The entire event was a high-wire act of inter-service protocol. 3 Navy admirals were attending an Army memorial dedication, a significant gesture of joint force unity. Peterson was the advance man, the aide responsible for ensuring every single detail was perfect, from the placement of the wreath to the security cordon. This old man was a smudge on his perfect canvas. He tried a different tack, softening his tone slightly. "Sir, I understand you're here to pay your respects. We all are. But the ceremony is about to begin. The families of the men we're honoring today will be arriving, and we need this space." He was appealing to the man's sense of decency, assuming he had one. The response was the same. Nothing. Just the quiet, immovable presence. The old man's posture, Peterson now noticed, wasn't just stooped with age. There was a peculiar stillness to it, an economy of energy that was less about infirmity and more about control. He stood with his feet slightly apart, his weight balanced, as if he could remain in that exact position for hours without tiring. It was an unnerving detail that pricked at the back of the commander's mind before he dismissed it as fanciful. He was just an old man, a stubborn one. Peterson took a deep breath, his patience evaporating in the cold air. "Look," he said, the politeness now gone, replaced by the sharp edge of a command. "I'm not asking you again. You are in a restricted area during a formal military proceeding. You have no credentials, you are not in uniform, and you are interfering with my duties. Now, move. That is an order." He put a particular emphasis on the last 3 words, a phrase that officers of his rank rarely had to use on civilians, but the situation felt like it was escalating toward the absurd. For the first time, the old man moved. He didn't turn around, but his head tilted slightly, as if listening to a distant sound. His thumb, which had been resting alongside his palm on the stone, slowly traced the engraved edge of a single name. The name was illegible from where Peterson stood, just another chiseled mark among thousands. The gesture was slow, deliberate, a caress of memory. It was also a final, silent act of defiance. It told Peterson, more clearly than any words could, that the man was not going anywhere. The commander's face flushed. This was no longer a logistical problem, it was a personal affront. He saw the man not as a mourner, but as a performer, a pretender. In his world of clean lines, crisp salutes, and documented service, this man was an anomaly. He didn't fit. He had no right to this profound, silent grief he was projecting. It felt unearned, a stolen piece of valor. "What is it with you?" Peterson snapped, his voice low and venomous, for his ears and the old man's alone. "Are you putting on a show? Is that it? You come here, put on this big, silent, grieving act for everyone to see? This is a sacred place. It's for the men on this wall, for the soldiers who served with them, for the families who loved them. It is not a stage for you to act out some fantasy." The accusation hung in the air, ugly and sharp. He was accusing the man of faking it, of appropriating the sanctity of the moment for his own obscure, pathetic reasons. He was calling him a liar. The old man's hand finally dropped from the wall. He let it fall to his side, but he didn't turn. The wind picked up, rustling the flags that lined the walkway, the sharp snap of the fabric sounding like distant rifle fire. Peterson felt a small, ugly thrill of victory. He had broken the silence. He had forced a reaction. He expected the man to shuffle away now, chastened and exposed. Instead, a voice emerged from the stillness, a sound like stones grinding together, rough and dry from disuse. It was just one word, a name. Hansen. The name was a ghost on the air, barely a whisper, yet it landed with the weight of a physical blow. It was one of the names on the wall, Peterson knew. He'd reviewed the list. Sergeant First Class David Hansen. Killed in action, official records stated, during a parachute training exercise in Honduras, 1983. A routine accident. Peterson's certainty wavered for a fraction of a second. The way the old man said the name, it wasn't just a word. It was a eulogy. Just then, the black sedan pulled up to the curb. The honor guard snapped to attention. Commander Peterson's personal crisis was over. The official one was just beginning. 3 men in the immaculate service dress blues of the United States Navy emerged from the car. Admiral Graves, a man whose face looked like it had been carved from granite, led the way. Flanking him were Admiral Cho, a sharp, intelligent-looking man of Korean descent, and Admiral Bennett, younger, but with the same unmistakable aura of command. Peterson's back went ramrod straight. He strode over to meet them, his mind racing. He had to get the old man out of there before the admirals noticed the blemish on his otherwise perfect event. "Admirals," he said, offering a crisp salute. "Welcome. We are ready to proceed." Admiral Graves returned the salute with a curt nod, his eyes already scanning the area, taking in the wall, the wreath, the honor guard, and the old man. "What's that, Commander?" Graves asked, his voice a low rumble. He gestured with his chin toward the figure who was still standing by the wall, now a focal point of unwanted attention. Peterson's heart sank. "Sir, I apologize. A civilian. He's confused, I think. I've been trying to ask him to clear the area, but he's being uncooperative." The excuse sounded flimsy even to his own ears. Admiral Graves's gaze narrowed. He was a man who had spent 40 years assessing situations and people in seconds. He looked from the flustered young commander to the still figure in the worn coat. He saw no threat, just an old man having a private moment. "Give him a minute, Commander," Graves said, his tone dismissive. "He's not bothering anyone." But Peterson, desperate to justify his earlier aggression and reassert his control, pressed the point. "Sir, with respect, he's been here for almost an hour, right in the path of the procession. And he's been muttering. I think he's disturbed." He lowered his voice. "He keeps saying something about a shadow, something falling." He'd misheard. The old man hadn't said, "a shadow falling." He'd said a name. But the mangled phrase, spoken in Peterson's attempt to paint the man as unhinged, had an entirely different effect. The words shadow and fall hung in the air. Admiral Bennett and Admiral Cho exchanged a quick, almost imperceptible glance. It was Admiral Graves who reacted first. The granite facade of his face seemed to crack. The color drained from his cheeks. He took a half step forward, his eyes locked on the old man, who remained facing the wall. "Commander," Graves said, his voice suddenly tight, strained. "What exactly did he say?" Peterson was confused by the sudden shift in intensity. "Sir? He said something like Shadowfall. I don't know, it didn't make any sense." But it did make sense. To the 3 men standing before him, it made a terrible, world-altering kind of sense. It was a key, unlocking a door that had been sealed for nearly 4 decades. A door sealed with black ink, burned files, and official lies. Admiral Graves moved past Peterson as if the younger officer had ceased to exist. He walked slowly across the grass, his polished black shoes sinking slightly into the damp earth. Admirals Cho and Bennett followed a few paces behind, their faces a mixture of disbelief and dawning horror. They stopped about 10 feet from the old man. Graves looked at the panel he was standing before. Section 17. Names from 1983. Hansen, Miller, Rodriguez. 5 names, all listed as casualties of a C-130 training accident in Central America. A lie. They all knew it was a lie. It was a story they had helped create. Graves's voice, when he spoke, was a choked whisper, barely audible over the wind. Operation Shadowfall? The old man stiffened. The name was a specter, a classified ghost invoked in the open air. Slowly, deliberately, he turned. For the first time, he faced them. His face was a roadmap of a hard life, weathered and creased. But his eyes were clear, steady, and filled with a profound, ancient sorrow. They were the eyes of a man who had seen the end of the world and had been forced to walk back alone. He looked at the 3 admirals, men he hadn't seen in nearly 40 years, men who had been junior officers, intel analysts, and comms specialists on the periphery of his last command. He gave a single, slow nod. The recognition was instantaneous and absolute. It was like a lightning strike, arcing across the decades and incinerating the image of the stooped, unimpressive old man. In his place, they saw him. They saw Captain Silas Kane, U.S. Army Special Forces, the legendary, almost mythical commander of the unit, codenamed Wraith, the man who led Operation Shadowfall, the man who was not supposed to exist, the man whose own name was on a different, more secret wall, listed as killed in that same training accident to ensure the mission's failure remained forever buried. The silence that followed was more profound than any sound. It was a vacuum filled with shared memory, with the ghosts of the men on the wall, with the crushing weight of a secret held for a lifetime. Commander Peterson, standing forgotten off to the side, watched in stunned confusion as the entire dynamic of the scene inverted. He was no longer in control. He was a spectator to a play he could not comprehend. Then, Admiral Graves moved. His posture, already straight, became rigid. His shoulders squared. His right hand, adorned with the gold braid of his rank, came up in a salute so sharp, so precise, it seemed to slice the air. It was not the perfunctory salute to a subordinate. It was the deepest sign of respect a soldier can give another. His eyes, the eyes of one of the most powerful military men in the world, filled with tears that traced paths down his weathered cheeks. "Captain Kane," he choked out, the name a reverence. "My God, it's you." A moment later, Admiral Cho snapped to attention, his own salute just as sharp, his face a mask of stunned, sorrowful respect. Then Admiral Bennett, his youthful command presence dissolving into the raw emotion of a junior officer, finally face to face with a legend he'd only heard about in whispers. 3 United States Navy admirals, standing on the grass at Arlington, saluting a man in a frayed coat who, by every official record, had been dead for 38 years. They weren't saluting the old man. They were saluting the ghost he carried inside him. They were saluting the leader of the men on the wall. Commander Peterson felt the blood drain from his face. The world tilted on its axis. The clipboard slipped from his numb fingers and clattered onto the stone walkway. The sound was obscenely loud in the reverent silence. He looked from the saluting, weeping admirals to the old man, Captain Kane. He saw him clearly now. The quietness wasn't an act. It was the discipline of a man who had lived in the shadows. The stillness wasn't infirmity. It was the coiled readiness of a predator. The worn coat and scarred hands were not signs of poverty. They were the artifacts of a life lived outside the world of dress uniforms and career paths. The accusation he had hurled, "Are you putting on a show?" echoed in his mind, a testament to his own monumental, soul-crushing ignorance. He had stood on sacred ground and desecrated it with his arrogance. He had looked at a living monument to sacrifice and seen only a vagrant. Shame, hot and acidic, flooded him. He wanted the earth to open up and swallow him whole. Captain Kane did not return the salutes. He simply held their gaze, his own eyes glistening, not with tears of self-pity, but with the shared grief of their terrible secret history. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, an acknowledgement not of his status, but of their shared burden. It was an absolution and a communion all in one. Admiral Graves slowly lowered his hand, followed by the others. He took a step forward, his voice low. "Silas, we thought you were gone with them. The manifest. Your name was on it." Kane's gaze drifted back to the wall, to the name his thumb had traced. "I had to be," he said, his voice still a gravelly whisper. "Hansen saved my leg. I couldn't save anything else. I owed him. I owe all of them this, to stand watch. Every year." The simplicity of it, the raw, unadorned truth, was more powerful than any formal eulogy. He wasn't there for a ceremony. He was there to fulfill a duty, a lonely vigil for the men he had led and lost. Admiral Graves turned his head and looked at Commander Peterson, who was still frozen in a state of shock and self-loathing. The Admiral's eyes were not angry. They were filled with a profound, weary disappointment. "Go, Commander," he said quietly. "Check on the wreath detail." It was a dismissal, gentle in its wording but brutal in its implication. Peterson was being sent away from the presence of real consequence, relegated back to the world of trivial logistics he so clearly valued. He managed a choked, "Yes, sir," and turned, walking away on legs that felt like lead. His career, his pride, his entire self-concept had been dismantled in the space of 5 minutes by a silent old man and a forgotten code word. But as he walked away, the shame was already beginning to curdle into something else, a horrifying, humbling, and necessary lesson. The 3 admirals closed ranks around Captain Kane, forming a small, tight circle. They spoke in low tones, the wind carrying away their words. They were no longer admirals and a forgotten captain. They were just 4 old soldiers standing together before a wall of names, bound by the gravity of what they had lost and what in that moment they had found again. The approaching sounds of the formal ceremony, the distant commands and shuffling feet, seemed to belong to another world entirely. Here, on this small patch of grass, the real memorial was already complete.